It's a very simple story. Let's see if we can glean its deep meaning for us. In a time long ago, there was a very rich merchant. His business had prospered and his wealth flowed. But throughout all of his life, he had never refused anyone in need. And he would always give hospitality when hospitality was due. Of course, there came a time when it was time for him to go to other realms, leave his body, and he left behind 3 sons. But when he arrived in the celestial realms, because of his good works and the life that he had led, it was decided by the gods that his sons should each be given a boon. So the great prophet Elijah was sent to pass these gifts to each of the merchant's sons. So when Elijah presented himself to the eldest son, he said, "Because of your father's good works, you have been granted one wish. What is the wish that you would ask for?" And the eldest son said, "I've always wanted to be rich and famous, to be revered by everyone and have great wealth." "It is done," said Elijah, and he left. And when he left, the eldest son went into his house, and there he saw an old boot. And he was about to throw out this old boot when he realized that it was filled with gold coins. And when he emptied out those gold coins, it immediately filled up again. Elijah went to the second son and said the same thing. "Your father's good works have brought you a boon. What wish is it you would make?" And the second son said, "I want to be the wisest and the most knowledgeable person in all the land. I want to be revered because of my wisdom and knowledge." Elijah said, "It is done." And when he left, the second son went into his house, and there on the table was a book. And when he opened this book, he found there the answers to all the questions that he'd ever asked. Whatever page he opened it at, there was the answer to the question that was posed. And then Elijah went to the third son and said the same thing. "What is your wish?" And the third son said, "Well, I have need of nothing. I have all that I need. I only want to lead a happy life." And Elijah said, "It is done." And the third son scratched his head and said, "What is it that's done?" But Elijah left. Well, the first son became inordinately rich. He became well known throughout all the land. He became the mayor of his city. indeed becoming quite famous. He built a palatial house with many servants and lived very richly. The second son became renowned for his knowledge, and people came from far and wide to hear of his wisdom. And the third son led just an ordinary life, tilling his fields, tending his garden. But one day there was a knock on his door, and when he opened the door, there was an old man. And the old man said, "My cart has broken down just nearby, and it's late in the evening. Would you give us hospitality for the night so that on the morrow we can fix the wheel of our wagon? Could we stay in your barn?" "Oh," said the youngest son, come into the house where it's warm. The barn is too cold. Stay with me, and in the morning we'll repair your wagon." But it so happened that the old man had his granddaughter with him, and when they came in to share the hospitality of the youngest son, after they'd had a simple meal and they were telling tales around the table, a bond was made between the youngest son and the granddaughter of the old man. So the next day, when they went out to repair the wheel, the youngest son took his time about the reparation so that they could stay an extra night. And, of course, the bond was solidified, and when the old man and his granddaughter were about to leave, the young man burst out, Please, I've fallen in love with your granddaughter. May I ask her hand in marriage?" And the old man, seeing that this young man was a fine young man, honorable and giving, etc., gladly agreed to the marriage. And so the young man was married to the maiden. Now time passed, and it was decided that Elijah would come down and see how these three men were faring. So he came to the house, the palatial residence of the first son, dressed in appearance as an old beggar. And when he came to the door and knocked on the door and asked for largesse, the eldest rich son said, "Get out of here. I have no time for beggars. Don't sully my doorstep." And with that, Elijah took off the garments of the beggar and showed his real self and said, "You have not lived up to that heritage which your father has given you. So the gift that has been given is taken from you." The eldest son sneered and said, "You cannot take away my gift." But he hurried inside his house, and sure enough, the old boot was still filled with gold. But when he emptied it, instead of filling once again, it remained void and empty. In due time, with the pattern of life that the eldest son led, he was soon returned to a state of poverty. Elijah went also in the disguise of a humble shepherd to the house of the second son. And when he knocked on the door, and it was opened, he said to the second son, I have come for your knowledge and your wisdom. Will you please teach me? And the second son looked him up and down, said, I do not teach ignoramuses like you. Get away from my doorstep. And again Elijah revealed himself and said to the second son also, you have not lived up to your father's heritage of giving, compassion, passing on of wisdom and knowledge without discrimination and thought. This gift is taken away from you. The second son hurried into the house, and when he opened the book, every page he opened was blank. He too was returned to a state of humbleness and poverty. Elijah went to the third son in the garb of a hermit beggar and knocked on the door. And when it was opened, the warmth of a fire inside, the smell of food cooking wafted in his nose. And he said to the third son, I'm a humble traveler. I have no place to rest for the night. May I sleep in your barn? No, said the third son. And as Elijah recoiled, the third son continued, please, it is cold in the barn. Come into our house. You're welcome to share what it is that we have. And so Elijah was brought in, and sharing with the young man and his family the warmth of his fireside, the food on his table, he shed the garments and showed himself as the prophet Elijah. And we know the end of the story. He said, you have fulfilled your father's heritage. The gifts that were given to your brothers are now given to you in manifold measure. From that time on, the youngest son became rich, illustrious, revered, sought after for his wisdom and his knowledge, and for the warmth, comfort, compassion that was received over his threshold. What's the deep meaning of this story for us? Going deeper than its message, its symbols, its confirmation of oneness and interrelatedness, something deep that we can recognize in ourselves now. What's the deep meaning of this story for you?
seems to be not much attachment left to desires.
That's right.
And the wishes. They become more simple and
Absolutely. Down to a fundamental, listen, down to a fundamental recognition of something that's there. What is that? What is that that responds to whatever it is that life brings? Not reacts from a level of conditioning, a judgment, but something deeper and fundamental that's natural, like our breath. What would we call it? A true nature? What name would you give it? What can we call it?
For me, it's like a freedom from attachments. And then once I have, once you're not really attached to things, then everything just flows a lot easier.
Yes.
Our emotions don't get out of control because we're not attached to something, whatever it may be, physical or emotionally or mentally. So it's just all, that's what I say for me.
Yes.
Freedom from
Yes.
every attachment.
That's what they call it, isn't it? Liberation. Liberation. Perhaps that's why they call it liberation, isn't it? One might say. But if we don't claim it, recognize it, claim it, then could it be that there's always a danger that we're going to get caught again in the judgments and the emotions?
If you do claim it, you're automatically back there, aren't you?
You are indeed. Yeah.
And then the ego just grows from there.
That's right. But how to claim it, how to name it when it's beyond name and form? That's the dilemma we have. But we'll keep plugging along, won't we? With another story or two, just in case.